Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here with this week's episode of Market Monday, I guess, Tuesday? Or am I just 6 days early for next week, Market Monday? Either way, we're going to talk about the topic of the cards that are currently seeing play in this week, what we call, week 0 for Standard for the rotation of Throne of Eldraine coming in. So let's just take a look at all the lists that have been released on MTGO. And there was also some fandom that was over the weekend that was using the Throne of Eldraine cards as well. So I'm not going to specifically focus too much on Throne. We're just going to look at an overview of all the cards that are currently seeing playing in Standard and see if we can get ahead of the trends of cards that might be undervalued. So here in the Standard League, the top cards seeing play are going to be on this right-hand column here. We see that Duress was in 46.67% of the decks, mainly in the sideboard. And then we had Murderous Rider in 40% of the decks. How these leagues work too is not more than one list can be posted here that has a similar list. So there's only going to be one Esper Stacks, for example. And no matter if like 50 of these decks showed up, only one. So it gives a little bit of skewed numbers. We really need to wait for like a big tournament for the better data. However, it still is good to see what people are playing and what is being successful. And if Murderous Rider is being played in 40% of the deck, that means that black is very, very significant and doing quite well in the MTGO League. I also been playing a lot on MTG Arena. Yeah, you can laugh it up because Arena definitely is not the same as playing like MTGO or a major tournament. And I'm starting to get a gist of like what cards are also seeing play. The thing that you can get from playing Arena though is casuals. Casuals do affect the market. So something that I've been surprised on here that is not on the list is a card like Questing Beast. So mono green decks are everywhere right now on Arena, as well as a bunch of red decks. And there's some similar trends with those mono red decks. A lot of them are using the 4-drop that doubles the damage because that's just catnip to casual players. And so I'll be trying to play a few more Arena in the ranked and see exactly what I come across a lot. And that, of course, will translate to paper eventually with what the casuals are trying to go for. And then, of course, we're going to keep an eye on the more competitive scene. So Murderous Rider is still, in my opinion, very, very overvalued because there's a lot of supply that is going to come out from Throne of Eldraine. My rule of thumb is never invest in a rare over $5 unless it sees a significant amount of modern play. Because if you go back to other standards, I think what was the example that I always give from the Sylvan Advocate? Sylvan Advocate was at one point in, I think, 45 to 50% of the decks in Standard and could barely ever crack that $3 to $5 mark. And I think that's the same with these Standard in this day and age, and especially a set like Throne of Eldraine that's going to have collector's editions that if people want a specific one, they're going to go for that. And then these just regular Murderous Riders, because I think there will be even more supply of this particular card because there are more versions of this card. You can get the foil of the extended art, or not extended art, the adventure art, as well as just the regular adventure art. And that's kind of unique to those adventures. So there's going to be more supply of these particular cards out there than other sets due to, the collector's editions coming out. And all the promo packs that they give to local game stores have a higher chance of getting like the adventure cards than they do other rares. And for that reason, I think Murderous Rider is going to go down in price down to that $5 to $6 range pretty soon. So you wouldn't be surprised if this is going to collapse within the next week or two, even though it is seeing a lot of play. Then we have Noxious Grass from M20, which is more of a sideboard card, but there I guess is the Questing Beast. So I got ahead of myself. So it does look like Questing Beast is in these lists. It looks like Green-Black did have quite a bit of representation even in this Standard League, as there was a lot of different decks that were different enough to hit the list here. And it's also a very good sideboard card that a lot of green decks can bring in when there are Teferis and Narsets running around. Then speaking of Teferi's still really high up here on the list here with 26.67%. And the Knight of Ebon Legion, one of the cards I've been talking about, did have that price spike. So I think this is the one we called last week for the card that I assumed was going to go up. And yes, it has. It's just skyrocketed in price. Core 2020 was just dismally opened. And, this is when I should have pulled the trigger on more. Been trying to free up more capital around the Christmas season than actually invest in Magic cards, but it was a good call, and this card did go up, and it does see play in so many different decks. Basically, any black deck that can run it. It's a great tempo card. It feels very similar to that Sylvan Advocate that I was talking about earlier, where aggro decks are going to run it, control decks are going to run it just as a roadblock card, as well as mid-range can also run it just as their good slot for the early game, pushing into the mid game. So not surprised there with Knight of the Ebon Legion. And then we have Gilded Goose that is going in a lot of the Oko decks, and I still think this one's a little bit overvalued. Same thing. Any card over $5 I don't think is going to be able to hold its value. This is a Birds of Paradise-ish card. It might have the best chance of possibly seeing like a modern deck, just with the ability to create those food tokens if people need it just as a one-time shot for the accelerant, and then have some sort of versatility after that. But I still don't see it. I think that in almost all cases, Birds of Paradise or another, even card like Llanowar Elves is a little more powerful for most decks. If we go over to the next card is Gutter Bones. This one's actually quite interesting. The price point actually seems pretty reasonable. I'd do some more research on this particular one, maybe in the comment section below. If this was in like the Planeswalker decks or guild kits or whatnot. I can't think of it out of the top of my head, but there could be a reason for the low price here. So before you invest in a card like this, I definitely think you should look at it. However, I think Ravnica Allegiance is in a good spot for cards to invest in. I think some of the mythics, if you compare Ravnica Allegiance mythics to Guilds of Ravnica or War of the Spark, they tend to be able to hold a higher price tag than either of those. And you also look at the Shocklands, and same thing. It looks like the Shocklands out of Ravnica Allegiance are holding better value. So that just means that it wasn't open as much as the Guilds of Ravnica. So a rare that does see this much play, almost as much as that Knight, is a good indicator this card could go up. So keep it on your watch list. I wouldn't fault you whatsoever from pulling the trigger on this particular card. Again, if there's a big if, it does not have some sort of subsequent printing in like a Planeswalker deck or whatnot. The buy list price of Card Kingdom does tend to be not very aggressive, not even 50%. So yeah, that doesn't mean there's a lot of movement from Card Kingdom at the moment. The market price, though, is above the mid. So that is another thing that this card has going for it. Let me adjust this really quick so you can see it here. It's a little bit out of focus here. So it is, let's just kind of reduce this a little bit so you can see the prices of the cards. There we go. Good enough. All right, so you can see right there that it is, so the market price is above the mid, and yeah, I think that's a good indication that this card is poised to go up in the short term. Alrighty, so let's move on to the next card. Veil of Summers is another card that you basically is just a sideboard card to bring in versus those particular deck. Lots of blue and black decks running around. This is a great sideboard card to bring in. Another one, the Midnight Reaper. This is another card that was able to hit a decent price tag last time around, going up from the $1 to $3.50, has gone back down to about $2. The Card Kingdom spread is very aggressive at $1.70. That means that the card is actually moving pretty quickly. It means they're having a hard time keeping their inventory when they're above that 50% spread. And let's see. Nope, Channel Fireball still not paying a lot, and they still actually have it for very cheap. The market price still has a bit to catch up to the mid, but it still does, with that Card Kingdom spread, appear to be a pretty good investment. This is a nice double dipping card. It's going in Knights decks as well as it's going in the Rakdos Aristocrats type style or Rakdos Sacrifice deck that is very, very potent right now. All right, so let's just start taking a look at some of the deck lists that are seeing play. We have the Esper stacks here with the Dance of Mance, which is pretty interesting with returning artifacts or enchantments back from the graveyard to the battlefield, and then being able to animate them as 4/4s. Kaya's Wrath is still a card that has been interesting for a while here. It's hit even further than it has been. Card Kingdom still has this for insanely cheap. Not a good buy list. The market price in mid just shows that I think this one wasn't a Warzov Guild kit. Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's one of the reasons. And didn't have a promo as well. Maybe it didn't. I think there's another reason why Kaya's Wrath is cheaper than maybe it's Kaya's Planeswalker deck. Maybe that's what it is. But anyway, yeah, it's still pretty cheap. I'd be waiting before I pull the trigger when Card Kingdom might adjust their price up, where you see that market price actually start to close the gap with the mid. And then that's where you utilize your Card Kingdom credit. So I haven't talked about this too much on the Rogue Market, but I do like to buy list cards directly to Card Kingdom because this actually happens more often than not. People always laugh and scoff when I say I buy cards from Card Kingdom because you think if we look at all the other examples that we looked at prior to this, Card Kingdom has been the most expensive comparatively to all the other cards. And in this case, Card Kingdom is the cheapest. And that's where you really have to capitalize on the Card Kingdom. There have been plenty of times that I've sold Card Kingdom back their own cards for more than I purchased them from. And if you do the buy list where you get 30% additional over cash, it really makes Card Kingdom even that much more lucrative to use over other buy lists. In fact, I barely ever use any other buy list. I'll use at that point, I'll use like Card Sphere or other ways to get rid of cards rather than other buy lists. But Card Kingdom we use a ton to kind of do this rinse and repeat game using their own inventory. So back to this particular list, we have Planeswalker Cleansing been reprinted a lot. The Thought Erasure could be poised to go up again just because of how much is being seen play, but $1 for a common is probably right. And we have Teferi that's still very, very expensive as it does see the modern play. A couple other interesting cards, the Doom Foretold. This is a 4 of in the deck, and this is the perfect deck for it, where you can basically get rid of all your opponent's permanents, and then you get a 2/2 white knight, as well as you'd get a draw a card, and your opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. So it seems to be the perfect card for the list. And then speaking of Haukai's Wrath, same thing with Oath of Kaya. Oath of Kaya sees a lot of play and is actually under $1. So this one, again, I'll have to do some more research about it. Maybe this isn't the Planeswalker deck for the reasoning why this card is so low. It is War of the Spark as well. So that could actually keep the price way down just because of how much that was opened. But this has been interesting to me for a long time because of just how much play Oath of Kaya has seen. Over in the sideboard, nothing too interesting, a bunch of 2-ofs and 1-ofs. Unmoored Ego is one that is starting to see a lot more play. I even see this in a lot of best of one arena with the Thought Erasure and Unmoored Eagle. A lot of decks actually can't survive that sort of combo if they're kind of one-trick ponies. This is another card that I've been watching very, very closely. All right, so we go over to Mono Green Stompy. This one is going to be running the Gilded Goose. The other card I've been seeing a ton of in these lists. So there is some variety of what people actually do use past Pelt Collector. I have seen like the Barkhide Trolls. I've seen the other 2-drop as far as the it's the 2-drop that then attacks and gives something plus X, but X, where X is its power in the 2-drop slot. But almost every deck has run the Pelt Collector. So this is another one that is kind of interesting to me with the Pelt Collector. It has hit its bottom and is starting to go up. The market price has a ways to go. The Card Kingdom spread is also not in that 50% range. So might be too soon for this card, or I mean, right now actually could be the perfect time if you can get on these low prices, but it's going to be a while before this card pops. But I have seen a lot of these running around in these Stompy type lists, in the Gruul list as well. The Gruul is a very, very decent archetype with the Riot Gruul that runs Pelt Collectors. It's its go-to 1-drops, and it can actually get quite big. So in this particular deck, it is going to get big with the Barkhide Trolls. The Leafkins and the Paradise are then going to be ramping into like the Voracious Hydra. And Yorva, Lord of the Garen Brig, haven't seen personally this too many in the Stompy list, but this is another card that enters a 4/4 for 3, and then it can get bigger and bigger as the cards come out. This one is just stopping, though, at Questing Beast, and then getting the card advantage to the Great Henge. This is another card I've seen a lot of that people have been playing, but this is kind of the problem. Many decks are only running 1 or 2 copies. So Castle of the Garen Brig 2 seems to be heavy in this particular deck to ramp to that 6 mana. However, I think that Voracious Hydra is really the only thing that... and the Great Henge, so I guess they're ramping into the Great Henge for this one, too. Initiative Who Shakes the World, still seeing a decent amount of play, but War of the Spark, 15.5, it's past that price point, and have been seeing a ton of Vivian Arcbow Ranger in these mono green Stompies. It tends to be the card that, regardless of the list, they have thrown this card in. It's a 4 of in this particular deck. This one's interesting too because of Core 2020 at $15 for 4. That seems very, very undervalued. If we actually look at the trajectory, we have, this is flatlined out. We have Card Kingdom that's bumped it up, and the buy price, though, is exactly at 50%. So, again, that means there's probably not a lot of movement on their inventory. And the market price from the TC Mid still has quite a ways to go from 333 to 386. If we keep continuing down, we have the Shifting Ceratops in the sideboard. They seem reasonably around what was that going to be, around 350 a piece. And the Nullhide Feryx, this one's also interesting that it's in the sideboard. Most of these lists, both in the Gruul and the Mono Green, have been running them in the main with the Hexproof, also a way to bump up both your Pelt Collector and your Yorvo Lord of Garen Brig. But this particular deck is just thrown it in the sideboard. Thrashing Brondons also seem to be a lot in these Pelt Collector type strategies. Have seen a lot of Voracious Hydras in multiple decks. There's a blue-green deck too that has been running it to ramp it out, because the be able to either double or fight seems to be the perfect option for this particular card. All right, so let's move down to the Rakdos Aristocrat. Seeing a ton of this deck. Again, there are multiple ways to run it. The one I've been seeing the most of is actually the Bontu version of the Rakdos Aristocrats. This one does not have Bontu in it. Bontu is a very interesting card at this price point. This one is going off of kind of all over the place. So this one does have the Midnight Reaper as a 4-of, and the Mayhem Devil, and then a Cavalier, and a 1-of Chandra Acolyte of Flame. This card has not been doing as well as I thought it was going to do week 1. But yeah, just a lot of utility with this particular card, running off the Cauldron Familiar with the Witch's Oven combo. So there is, usually that's kind of the difference between the two flavors, is are we going to run the Witch's Oven to sacrifice creature to create food tokens for the Cauldron Familiar to get in that damage. The Mask of Immolation is another way to sacrifice creatures and then rinse and repeat, and then go higher on like the Orzhov Enforcers. I've also seen the other one drop that deals damage when it dies. So there's a lot of ways to build this though. So yeah, this particular one is going to be that combo. So I'd like to look at Bontu. Nothing too interesting for this particular list with, uncommons from the new set. Doesn't look like a lot. Like just one Ayara, the first Loch Twain. Interesting little card. Whenever another black creature enters the battlefield, wow, that's pretty good. Each opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life. So it's got that Aristocrats type theme to it, and then be able to sacrifice them to draw cards. So yeah, not a bad inclusion. It looks like this particular deck though is just trying to figure out what cards are working, what cards are not, before it's more finely tuned. We have a mono black aggro, so this is very similar to this one, running the Spawn of Mayhem. Spawn of Mayhem has a card that has gone crazy within the last couple days, all the way from $2.50 to $10. It is seeing play in the mono black list of the aggros as well, besides just the I guess this is mono black aggro. Yeah, here it is with the mono black aggro with the Footlight Fiend, Gutter Bones, Knight of the Even Legion, the Reaver to amass. Wonder why they're using the Reaver of the Death Toucher. So the Death Toucher does a 1/2 Death Touch and Afterlife when it dies. So this one's just putting it out as a 1/2 and a 1/1 immediately. The Order of the Midnight to then get value off of returning creatures, and this one going all out on the Priest of Forgotten God, as well as the Ayara, First of Loch Twain. So this is very similar to the list we just looked at, with Rankle in here. Rankle is kind of a neat card in this because it does have haste, and it's something you don't really expect from black to be hit with a haste card. So other than that, very similar to the other list we saw before. Lots of Midnight Reavers. The Golgari Knights. So this one is more of a mono green, but it's splashing for both Questing Beast and Pelt Collector. So a 1-drop that gets bigger and bigger, as well as another 1-drop that can get bigger and bigger with a 1-drop that comes back. And then a 3/1 Flash is also pretty good. It can be a combat trick with the Pelt Collector. This one's kind of interesting at $1. I still think, though, that Throne of Eldraine has, with the first set, is most rares. You want to make sure that they see a ton of play, and then don't even expect them to get above the $4 to $5 mark, as it's just, at that point, there's just too much stock out there. Other than that, again, Spawn of Mayhem seen a lot of play, Questing Beast a lot of play, Murderous Rider, Midnight Reaper. We're starting to see a theme with these particular cards. Interesting to find Finality in the sideboard. This is a card that I thought might have a bigger impact on the meta. However, so far, not so much. So here's another green-black list with very usual suspects here with Knight of Even Legion, with the Pelt Collector. So Pelt Collector is looking better and better as we go down these lists. The Wildwood Trekker, whenever it attacks or blocks, if you control another non-human, it gets +1/+1. So it's just basically a 2/2. In this particular deck for 1. So this one's going out very, very aggressive with the Rotting Regisar. Have seen a lot of Rotting Regisars in various decks too. Even those Aristocrat decks, or even the ones where you can draw cards, they're running it with the land, the black land, to just gain residual cards. And then, you throw away your any cards you have left in your hand after the Rotting Regisar, but then you can fill back up your hand pretty easily. So again, Vivian Arkbow Ranger, Questing Beast, we have the Midnight Reaper. Those seem to be the cards that are seeing the most play. Of course, the McFlash is still a thing. It's very similar to what it had before with the Preserver as a way to get another buff creature. And the Brazen Borrower actually is seeing play. So there's a Mythic that is seeing play in this particular deck. This is another interesting card to see if it will be good enough for... I don't think it would be good enough for Modern. Yeah, definitely not. I think this is definitely a standard card. And it's only running as a 3-of with the Brazen Borrower. I've actually got a brew that's running basic green-blue adventures that I'll have to show you that's actually performing pretty well. And this is an all-star in that particular deck, but that's another story for another day. Not a lot for this particular deck. Most of the value is held in the lands of the breeding pool. Fabled Passage is seeing a lot of play here and there. It's another card. This card is a rare and does have a high price tag, which is interesting for this particular card because mainly EDH is going to keep this very, very high. So I don't think this is going anywhere. I think this is going to stick around $10 as EDH will keep buffing out any sort of supply that comes in. All right, so Bant Hero. This is a list that was seeing a play before rotation and nothing really rotated, with cards like the Trostani Discordant. $2 Mythic seems interesting, but just has tons of supply out there, as well as a Hydroid Crisis and the Hero Precinct 1. Hero Precinct 1 was a card that I think would be great post-rotation. So far, it hasn't really seen as much play as I thought it would. This is another card you should definitely keep your eye on. Oko is seeing a ton of play in various decks. Even if they're not even running food tokens, this card is just a value-based token. This has the most hype. You can see the price tag is very, very hard for Oko. I think it's going to come down to like the $20 to $25 range because I think it's incredibly hard for cards to go above that, even if they do see modern play. So if you have any Okos, I think this is a good card to move at the moment. Just, again, even if it is just so dominant, I have a hard time seeing it hold this price tag of what, $40 a card. We have Once Upon a Time that is also seeing a lot of play in various decks. This one also I think is a little bit high for a rare. Again, use that $5 range for what rares can be in standard. Modern, though, this is a card that people have been saying is going to have a high impact on it. I actually do think it's pretty good, but we'll have to wait and see where it comes into play there. Other than that, again, the only thing interesting is we have seen some Tolsmer Friend of Wolves. I've seen an Abzan list, too, that have been running this card. Definitely keep your eye on this card with the Garrick decks. This seems like an interesting combo. So we have another Bant Ramp with Tolsmer Fiend of Wolves showing up again, so not even with the Abzan version, and running like Wicked Wolf. And is that the only wolf here? They didn't make Questing Beast of Wolf? Tis. Another Oku deck, Teferi, Nissa, so it's just trying to get that mid-range value, Hydroid Crisis to basically pad everything. This is just one of those decks that is very, very good against aggro, I'm assuming. I've also seen another list of a Bant running the Risen Reef with the Charming Prince. So Risen Reef and Charming Prince is a pretty good combination. And then Agent of the agent that then gains control of a permanent. I've seen those lists running around. So there's a lot of this type of archetype going around too. Questing Beast, though, Hydroid Crisis, still mythics that are seeing a lot of play. We have the Golgari mid-range. This one running the Liliana Dreadhorde General. I've seen this in pair with Garrick as well. Nissa, Vraska Golgari Queen, that seems to be pretty low at $7. That's probably about right. And we have the Gilded Goose Paradise Druid to ramp into them with Voracious Hydra and Murderous Rider. So you're starting to see a lot of similarities with these decks, and that's exactly the cards you want to be targeting, is anything that's undervalued, that sees a lot of play. So I'd even put Voracious Hydra on the list. That at a $2 out of Core 2020, this card is probably seeing more play than what its price tag is suggesting. We have White Weenie with the Fairy Guide Mother is just a 1/1. The Giant Killer that is a 1/2 for 1 and then it can also be used to destroy power 4 or greater if that comes into play. Usually just casting it out. The Law Rune Enforcer is just tapping everything down. Loyal Pegasus. The Venerable Knight to put +1s on counters when it dies. Tithe Taker and Venerate locks it on. So it's the kind of resurrection of the White Weenie that just a lot of the cards rotated, but they did get some cards that are easy replacement cards. We have Raise the Alarm and Unbreakable Formation, Conclave Tribunal, and the Castle Ardenvale. This card to me just seems very, very undervalued, even right now at around the $1 mark. So it's what, $1.25, $1.30 a piece for the Castle Ardenvale. This card just seems to want to go in most EDH decks that are running white. I mean, it just has very little downside to actually throwing it in a deck, and probably wants to go in a lot of modern decks that run white. That is not hard to get a Plains to have this come into play untapped. It says Plains. It doesn't say basic Plains. It's just a Plains. So all the Shocklands that are Plains count as this. I'm expecting this one to see a lot more impact than it's currently seeing. I think the value of this, basically it's 5 mana because you have to tap itself. To create a 1/1 white human creature token is pretty good in any format where you need to have that residual. So many times when Legion's landing was flipped, that was the difference against the control matchups or even the aggro matchups to be able to beat those. Just that every turn getting a chump blocker or something you can tack in. So this is a card that I'm definitely been looking at. Getting Blackblade, I expect this to see more play in the various decks, but still in the sideboard in this case, which is interesting. We have this the Hushbringer. There are already some people talking about some combos with this and the 8/8 Trample Haste creature in black to kind of pairing those two together. It creates the goat tokens for opponents. Flying lifelink for 2 mana, and then creatures not triggering in the battlefield. Seems pretty good if we get into like a trigger heavy meta. I mean, right here's a pretty trigger heavy Voracious Hydra, Gilded Goose, Golgari Finebroker. We shut those down. We've had cards that have played that role before. Mono-Red Cavalcade did have a list. We don't know how many actually 5-0'd though, because of course it only shows one. Running the Fervent Champion and the Ginger Brute as the haste creatures. Still very similar to the pre-rotation one, but this one is running Torbrand, Throne of the Redfell, and the Chandra Spitfire in it, and then the Chandra Acolyte of Flame. So it is seeing still enough play with the Chandra that could justify this card possibly going up. Core 2020, I don't put it that $5 rare mark. I think it can go up to like the 7 to 10, just because of how pitifully this set was opened. I think that the numbers wise, Core 2020 was the worst pre-release in a long time for attendance. And pre-release is one thing. The entire sales period was pretty bad for Core 2020. So I think that there's a lack of cards. So rares, mythics are definitely something you could be very focused on the set. Even uncommons from the Core 2020 era probably can hit that $1, $2, $3 mark pretty easily with just the lack of supply. This castle also is pretty interesting because of the low downside, and in a go wide strategy, I'm wondering why. We probably should see some white-red tokens or just some other token-based strategy with red start to see more play as a result of this castle being pretty good for what the drawback of just the comes to play tapped. Alrighty, so another Rakdos aggro deck. This is exactly what I was talking about before. This one is another Spawn of Mayhem, another Rotting Registrar. I've seen a lot of these decks. Night of the Ebon Legion in here. This one has the Robber of the Rich and the Dreadhorde Butcher. Another one that you should probably not focus on because, again, War of the Spark, pretty hard for a rare to go over even $1 in War of the Spark. Civic Food, this is the one that's taken the meta by storm. A lot of see this on Arena quite a lot. It does have some versatility on how you can build it, being either the Feasting Troll King or just not worry about the food tokens here, and just really shine of Oku and giving like a tempo-based feel to this deck. So I've seen a lot of these particular decks out there. Oko seems to be the real deal. It seems to be a very, very effective card in the meta. And yep, you'll see a lot of these. So another Hydrated Krasis, Gilded Goose type list. The Jeskai Super Friends. This is another one that I have seen a lot of with the Fires of Intervention. This card does seem to be very good in a deck. This, though, is a sorcery speed deck. Because you can only cast spells on your turn once you get the Fires of Intervention. But it basically doubles your mana at this point, as a lot of these cards in the deck are going to be, when you get it out, they're going to be, you're going to be casting a lot of 5 mana spells and 2 of them one turn. Allows you to do some pretty crazy turns, like Sarkhan into Ugin, for example, is pretty good. And yeah, it's pretty good with the Fae of Wishes too, because you can go grab any of these cards out of the sideboard and cast them without, casting their mana cost. So, yep, you may cast spells with for mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control without paying their mana cost. So, cast a bunch of these higher drop spells once that you've got, so basically tutor up and then cast it. It's got Time Wipe to bring back your Fae of Wishes. I've seen a couple of different versions of this. I've actually just seen Jeskai Super Friends as well with the good old school win with Sarkhan and Chandra's. And then attacking in with your Planeswalkers. So there you have it for the first league. I thought I'd just run through them and talk about the cards that are seeing play here. Again, we did see a lot of Murderous Riders and in various decks, not just even one deck. We also, the Midnight Reaper showed up quite a bit. And we'll keep an eye on this, but again, it's good to just test the water. It's funny, like a lot of finance people don't even play Magic, and I think you're missing out on a huge aspect of if you got to be familiar, you got to be playing those leagues, and there's more than these tournament finishes. Of course, tournament finishes have this domino effect because they win, and then people see the win and they buy the cards because they think it will make them win. But you can't also disregard like all of the cards that are all the decks that are seeing a lot of play and maybe going 4-1 or not being as successful. So that's why I highly, highly encourage just getting an arena account, playing your dailies every day, and just seeing what you come across. And that will give a bigger picture of what the majority of people are actually playing and building. There have been plenty of metas too where like the mono red cards have never really been good. However, they had a higher price tag than they probably should be because it's a very accessible deck for people to pick up and play. And then, of course, the price then reflect that when the more people are playing it. So anyway, we'll probably at the other channel tomorrow do a top 10 list cards of I think are the best possible specs for this post-rotation format. And again, it's going to be a couple of factors with the price point based upon how much they see play. Because, of course, Oko, in my opinion, is not investable at $40. It simply is not. Now, watch it go up to 100 and people can laugh in my face. However, those are the type of rules that I set is even though it sees a ton of play, where is its cap? And you can look at other cards historically of where they've been able to go up. I mean, look at the Hydroid Krasis just had a massive portion of the meta at one point in what it couldn't crack $40 and now has gone back down to 20-ish, and it's probably sees as much play as it does now as it really did then. And that's just the scope of things, of how things work in standard Magic. A lot of people avoid investing in standard. I think it's one of the best ways to get in and out pretty quickly, to have those quick profit margins. And so you should not ignore that. I think it's very easy to move those cards. Sometimes it's harder to move Legacy and Commander cards, and you have to find the buyers in the right times and things like that. I hope you enjoyed this video of the late Market Monday. Thanks for watching.